Well, hello everyone. I am the chapter leader for Starry Sky South, and I'm so excited to share our presenter today, who is Kelly Beatty. And I just have to share this really rich background of Kelly with you all, in case some of you are not in astronomy or just recently became involved with the International Dark Sky Association. So Kelly is an award-winning science journalist and astronomer. He currently is an active member of ID Massachusetts, and recently their state introduced a statewide dark sky bill to the state legislators. Kelly has served on the IDA board of directors, and for a long time, over 40 years, he was an editor, senior editor at Sky and Telescope magazine. So that's maybe some way that many of us recognize his name. He was also a former editor of the Night Sky magazine. He's won multiple astronomy and journalism awards from places like the American Astronomical Society and the American Geophysical Union. And I'm just gonna pop into the chat. One of my favorite videos that is recorded on the web by Kelly, in which he shares with others about how do you choose your first telescope? My favorite part of being acquainted with Kelly is his warm and gentle demeanor. It's just extraordinarily welcoming, and I met him for the first time at the IDA conference 2 years ago, and just felt like I can be a part of this community by the way that he engages with the public. So Kelly, we're so thrilled to have you here in our Starry Sky South meeting. Starry Sky South started in April of 2022, and we have grown to several states across the Southeast, including Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, and pretty soon, in coordination with Dan Caton, who is the IDA North Carolina chapter,
yes,
hope to bring North Carolina on board as well.
I've known Dan for a long time.
Oh, that's wonderful. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you, so to speak, and really appreciate you coming again to our meeting tonight.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And I want to also thank Tom Berta for keeping the faith and doing such amazing things. He has been just a real example to me for I always say, and I'll say at the end of this talk, that one person can make a difference, and Tom, you're really doing it. So let me get going here. I'm going to try to share my screen with something that's useful. And let's start the show from the beginning. How does that look to you?
Excellent.
Okay, great. So minor miracles, let me tell you. I was having some trouble with my computer a little time ago. All right, so let's set the stage here. This is a quote I'd like you to read. With lights and ever more lights, we drive the holiness and beauty of the night back to the forests and the sea. Could have been written yesterday, but in fact, it was written a century ago, almost a century ago, by a naturalist named Henry Weston, who spent a year on Cape Cod in the darkness there and came to appreciate the beauty of a really dark night. And so that beauty has been spoiled in so many ways by light pollution, which simply is the illumination of the night sky by artificial sources. One thing that part what you might know is that there are kind of different flavors of light pollution. It can include glare, light trespass from a neighbor's security light onto your property or your bedroom window, any disturbance of the natural nighttime landscape. And the point is that a lot of the light that we create at night never touches the ground. It shines up into the sky. And as you'll see, it's not just the light that goes straight up that is the problem. So this is something that's pretty common around New England and maybe around your parts of the country too. It's what's generally called ornamental lighting. Looks very pretty during the daytime, gives towns that sort of old-timey look, and that's great. But I want to call your attention. Can you see my cursor? Yes? Okay. This light bulb here that's parked in the middle, is just not shielded at all. And so when it comes on, it shines light in every conceivable direction. I want you to note especially that there's no light shining directly underneath the light fixture, which is presumably where they want it to happen. But I use this as an illustration to show you how we can crudely kind of subdivide the sphere of light that is emitted by a light fixture into uplight, which is any light that goes above horizontal. Then there's this broad sort of useful light zone. And in particular, pay attention to this slice called the glare zone, which is below horizontal, but not by much. And I mentioned that the light that goes straight up is not the problem. This is a computer simulation with 3 different beams of light. The one on the top is confined to a cone that's within 20 or 30 degrees of straight up. And what the color coding is showing you is the amount of sky glow or light scatter created by that beam. And if you think about it, our Earth's atmosphere is actually very thin. So if you shine a light straight up, pretty soon it escapes the atmosphere and it's gone. It's out into space. The worst amount of light pollution is created by lighting fixtures in that bottom panel. These are light fixtures that shine their light just above horizontal in a almost horizontal direction in whatever direction they happen to be shining, because it's those light fixtures that create sky glow all along the path that those photons have through the atmosphere. I live about 20 miles from downtown Boston. My skies are pretty dark. I have like 5th magnitude skies, 5.2, 5.3 on a good night. But when I look straight up, I'm 20 miles from Boston. I know that some of the light pollution, some of the sky glow I'm dealing with is created by light fixtures that are in Boston shining nearly horizontal over my head. So that's something to be aware of. I'll quickly go through some of the good, bad, and the ugly of lighting fixtures. Fortunately, these are not something we have to deal with very much anymore. These were old style light bulbs with a kind of salad bowl glass underneath them. And the light bulb here in this case is down inside this glass. The glass acts as a refractor to spread the light out in some kind of pattern that's desirable. Below that is a more modern fixture in which the bulb is tucked up inside, and you can see that there's a flat bottom to this, so all the light must of necessity shine out through the bottom, not above horizontal. By the way, I want to mention this little cap here that you see, this little hockey puck that's on the top. That is the day-night sensor, and that's what allows these lights to be, they come on automatically at dusk and come back on just before dawn. These lights are on all night, every night. 4,100 hours, more or less, over the course of a year. And as I'll discuss later, there are ways that those are being removed. This is one of the worst offenders. A building with a light fixture slapped onto the side of it, shining out into a parking lot, usually over a doorway, but could be anywhere along the building, in an attempt to light up the parking lot from the side, literally. These are called wall packs. And in my book, they're sort of public enemy number 1 in terms of commercial lighting. They're just awful, because when they shine, this is a side view, not of that exact fixture, but a side view of how broadly the light is distributed. And you can see from the spread there of the beam that a lot of this light is going up into the sky. This is something that's perhaps, you can tell me if you have this down south there. This is a utility pole alongside a road, and these 3 light fixtures are rented from the utility company. So if a business wants to create lighting on its parking lot but doesn't want to spend the money to put in its own lighting, they can rent these fixtures from the utility company. They come along, slap them up on the side of the building, and sometimes they're shining on the parking lot from across the street, and they're just horribly shielded. Again, you can see how bad the spread is. By the way, if you ever want to take pictures like this for evidence in whatever situation, I recommend foggy nights, because they show the light beam very, very well when you do that. Now, something that's becoming more of a concern over time is sports lighting, which fortunately is generally not on all the time, but some of us may have to deal with that. This is at the U.S. Tennis Association facility in Flushing, New York. And I want to call your attention to this because the lights on the right-hand side, those three tall poles, are old style lighting. And the ones on the left-hand side of this picture are modern, well-shielded lighting by a company called Musco, which is patented a lot of this. And you almost can't tell that the lights are on. You certainly can't tell from outside the facility. So sports lighting has its own challenges, little league fields and things like that. And your best bet there is just to try to get them to be on as little as possible, because very few of them have the sort of well-controlled lighting that you see on that picture. Okay, so here are the 5 things that you need to be alert to, the things that light pollution really harms. One is, of course, the loss of the starry night sky. Some of you are old enough, perhaps, to remember that way up here in the northern U.S., 20 years ago, we had a widespread blackout that affected New England, the Northeast, and southern Canada. And you can see here that a lot of places where there should be a city aglow with light, like Ottawa and Toronto, Detroit, Buffalo, they're all dark. It was a very widespread blackout. So since it's August, the Milky Way summer Milky Way is really resplendent at that time. This is a picture taken from downtown Montreal, looking toward downtown Montreal, towards south, by an amateur astronomer named Todd Carlson during the blackout. You can see how beautiful a sky he had. And then the next night, the lights came back on, and this was what he normally deals with in that same location, including the bright street light at the lower right-hand corner there. So this is what we've lost and what we're fighting for. One of our greatest allies in this fight has been, believe it or not, the National Park Service, who about 15 to 20 years ago created a night sky team to go to the national parks that they could get to and do all sky photography to try to ascertain how dark the nighttime environment of these parks was. The Park Service came to realize that nighttime environment was just as important as the daytime environment. This is one of the darker places, Natural Bridges in Utah. And so you see an all sky fisheye there here. And then this is sort of the panorama around the horizon. And there is a small light bubble there from a couple of towns in the distance, but most of this light is from the Milky Way. It's a very, very dark location. Now compare that with this, which is from the Mojave Desert. And the color coding is telling you everything you need to know. That huge light bubble on the horizon is from Las Vegas, which is about 50 miles away. And these color-coded intensity maps were created from actual photographs that the team took. This is one of those photos. And this little streak here in the middle is not an artifact. That is instead actually the spotlight, whatever you want to call it, screaming from the top of the Luxor Hotel in downtown Las Vegas. A pretty nauseating sight to me, and I hope to you as well. A little bit closer to this side of the country, this is Acadia National Park up in Maine. And although there are a couple of light domes here from the town of Bar Harbor, it's generally quite dark there. And it's actually a great place to go stargazing in general from that park. And this park is on an island called Mount Desert Island. And the entire island is being put forward as an IDA certified dark sky place. So we wish them all the luck for doing that. Okay, and so the Park Service, in addition to having taken all of this data, have gone to some lengths to try to correct the wrongs that might have existed. In Yosemite National Park, for example, they've installed a whole series of really low-level amber LEDs to light the environment as little as possible. Grand Canyon just underwent, within the last couple of years, a similar retrofit of thousands of lights. Imagine Grand Canyon National Park and how busy a place that is. They redid all their lighting. They did an audit and it really improved on it. So this notion of a dark sky certified place is one of the main programs of the IDA, the International Dark Sky Association. And you can see the places around the country here, around the US, that have been certified in that way. A couple in your neck of the woods fairly recently is Cape Lookout National Seashore in North Carolina, which I think just in 2021 and also Stephen Foster National Park in Georgia, which I think was 2016. Some of you are probably familiar with these. They're a little far afield from me. But the number is growing. It's an important part of what IDA does. What these certified places do is not only demonstrate that they are dark or as dark as they reasonably can be, but more importantly, that the surrounding communities have affirmed that they will do their utmost through lighting ordinances or what have you to try to preserve what they've got. Okay, that's all about the starry sky. I'm going to flip through four others here. One is visual impairment, commonly called, glare. And here we need to do a little physiology. Our eye has two kinds of light sensors in it. The cones that you see there, the lower curve, is what we use for our daytime vision, our color vision. And the peak sensitivity of the cones is in the sort of yellow-green part of the spectrum. At night, when we're in darkness, our sensitivity shifts to the rods in our eyes, which are monochromatic. They only see gray. We don't have really color vision at night. But you can see that the peak is toward the blue-green, and this becomes important. What it means is that at night, our eyesight is especially sensitive to blue light. And you've probably noticed this yourself when you've been in the high beams of some oncoming car with a newer type of a headlight. It can be just searingly bright. And so what happens is that our eyes, one more thing I want to point out. Look at the sensitivity on the left-hand side here, right? This is a log scale. So our rods are roughly 1,000 times more sensitive to light than the cones are. And we can see pretty well. We humans see pretty well at night. But our sight at night is diminished, really compromised whenever there is a bright source of light within our field of view, such as this security light on the side of a building. That creates glare in our eyes. It causes our pupils to shrink. It bleaches out all the rhodopsin in our retinas that have sort of enhanced our nighttime viewing. And so it keeps us from seeing the fact that there's a guy standing there in the open gate. When you block the light and the glare is removed, your surroundings become much more evident. So glare is a big problem, especially with older people, because we old timers, as our eyes age, the inside, the vitreous humor in our eyes gets cloudy. We get, our lenses get cloudy, and all of that creates scattered light. So these sources of glare make it really hard for us to see well at night. The environmental consequences of night lighting there are whole books that have been written about this. About 70% of all species are nocturnal at some level, and some of them completely so. They mate, they eat, they migrate, whatever they might do, all at night. And so here are just two or three quick examples. Fireflies are obvious. Fireflies are a beautiful thing. They need darkness in order for their flashing pattern. Different species have a different pattern that they flash to attract a mate. And one of the things that emerging science has shown is that when there's a lot of light pollution in the area, when the sky is aglow, the males might come out and flash, but the females don't. And so no mating takes place. Another thing that we don't really think about too much is the nocturnal pollinators, moths especially, who are ordinarily out at night in the darkness, are much less likely to go out when there's a lot of light pollution in the neighborhood. And this is one stat. You might not have heard about this, but you can Google it. I'm not making this up. There is something called the insect apocalypse. Having to do with the fact that in the last 50 years, insect populations worldwide have declined by 75%. Now, light pollution isn't the cause of all of that, but it's some of it. And a third of the insects that are attracted to a stationary artificial light die before morning, either through exhaustion or predation. So it's very bad for the insects. We need the insects in a lot of ways. And then finally, well, two more quick examples. Bird migration. Birds, a lot of them migrate at night. A lot of them take their visual cues from both stars and the moon and glints off of water. There's a major migration route up the Atlantic coast it's that heavy red line along the East Coast there called the Atlantic Flyway. And most migratory birds fly at very low altitudes, a few hundred feet at best. And so they're especially distracted by lit buildings along their route. And this is a little bit complicated looking, but in the absence of any kind of artificial light, as on the left, they fly in a straight line. They know where they're going. They have a visual cue, say the moon rising off their left-hand wing or whatever it might be, but you put a bright building in the way, as on the right, and what they end up doing is circling around it incessantly until they either fall from the sky, exhausted, or dead. And there are I think this stat is actually underestimating. There are hundreds of millions of birds that are killed annually during migrations because of their encounters with the sea. And finally, something that's a little bit closer to what you have down there is sea turtle hatchlings. As you probably know, sea turtles lay their eggs on the shore. The turtle hatchlings, once they emerge from the sand, are trying to get to the water as quickly as possible. And they do that by cueing on the glints of water off the surface of the water. But if you have something like this beautiful resort complex nearby or across the street from where they need to be going, they're distracted and they head for that instead. And the results are not always pretty. I'm sorry about that, but this is what happens. It's a very bad situation for the sea turtles. Now, going up the anatomical food chain are human consequences. I'll keep this kind of short, but although it's important. We have this compound in our bloodstream called melatonin. It's secreted by the pineal gland in our brain. And about 20 years ago, it was discovered that there's a sensor in our eye that has nothing to do with vision. It's like an on-off switch for the pineal gland to secrete melatonin. During the daytime, there's very little melatonin in our blood. At night, when it's dark, we don't even have to be asleep. That little sensor is telling our brain, make melatonin, please. And so the amount of melatonin in our bloodstream surges. This is an important compound. It has lots of implications for our general well-being, and in particular, it's emerging as our internal defense at some level against cancers. And the problem is if you get up in the middle of the night and you make a raid on the fridge or go to the bathroom and flip on the light, that exposure in your eye to light causes the melatonin production to crash. And it's got to start all over. It's a little like dark adaptation in that sense. And so in the Beatty household, we don't have any bright lights at night. We have little red Christmas tree bulbs that we keep around that allow us to see, just like we were out on the observing field. They allow us to see quite well at night, get to the bathroom, whatever we need to do without disrupting our melatonin production. This became important during the 1980s when it was realized that certain classes of workers were having very high rates of cancer, breast cancer in women, prostate cancer in men, and it was eventually pinned on exposure to light at night, which suppressed melatonin production and left people more at risk for cancer. I won't spend a lot of time with this. This is a lab study of human cancers implanted in mice, and the ones that were kept in the dark, the open circles here, the bottom curve, had much slower tumor growth than the ones that were constantly exposed to light. This is this left-handmost curve. So the cause and effect here is sufficiently strong that shift work involving this kind of circadian disruption has been declared probably carcinogenic to humans. So if you know anyone who's in shift work, I would encourage them to get out of that because it's just not good for them. And in fact, the American Medical Association has gotten involved with this. By the way, as you go forward trying to make your case to various city councils and such, the AMA policies on outdoor lighting are one of one of the best arrows in your quiver. And for that, you can thank an amateur astronomer and recently retired cardiologist named Mario Mata, who is a name might be familiar to some of you, who was the principal architect for these AMA policies. Go Mario. And then finally is the obvious one, energy waste. We send a lot of this light into the sky. You've all seen maps like this, which are maps of the Earth at night. I'm homing in here on the United States a little bit. A lot of this is obvious. You see the lights, lighting up the Atlantic coast, Florida. Here's Atlanta. I feel sorry for anybody trying to do observing there. Chicago is even worse, and so forth. And then as I looked at this map, I said, well, wait a minute, what's this up here? That's up in North Dakota. What the heck is that? Oh, look, here's another one here in West Texas. What is that? Those are fracking fields. Those are oil fields that are lit up so brightly, so intently, 24/7, that they show up as huge blights on the landscape in these satellite images. It's very, very sad indeed. So I'm going to show you just quickly, because it shows your part of the country very well. This is a space shuttle time-lapse movie. I hope that's coming across and not being all jagged. Here's New Orleans here, and this is the Gulf Coast. Florida's down here, and Atlanta, of course. And you can just pick out all the major cities here. We're coming up the East Coast. Here's, I think that's Norfolk. You've got Richmond, Washington, Philly, Baltimore, Philly, New York City, up here in New England. And this is our beautiful, some of you might have been to Cherry Springs down here. Maine, the center part of Maine is amazing. And then, of course, here along the horizon is airglow and a beautiful auroral display going on for these astronauts. So you can find all kinds of movies like that. They're very compelling. But I wanted to spend a little time with a couple of graphics that I showed when I spoke to Tom Berta's club a few months ago. That's part of your territory. So these maps of light pollution are very easy to get. And I'll give you the website in just a second. And they're color coded to show you how intense it is. This is the Charleston area. And so you can, the site that I'm about to show you the URL for, you can draw a box around it. And having done that, you can create a plot that shows the increase in light pollution over time for about the last 12 years or so in that location. And this is again for Charleston. And this trend line is about 3% per year increase. And it's deceptive because 3% is bad enough. But the satellites that are taking these data can't see blue wavelengths. They're blind to blue light. And I'm sure you all know from having seen more than one of them that modern LEDs, especially those used for street lights and area lighting, have a lot more blue light in them than the warm and fuzzy high pressure sodium that the peachy colored lights that were rolled out by the tens of millions in as far ago as 1950 and 60. And so when I show you a 3% increase per year, that's probably not as much as it really is. I've made these charts for lots of places. In a lot of locations, it doesn't look like light pollution has increased at all. But in fact, it has because of this blindness to blue light. And so as it turns out, those of us who are on the ground looking around and bemoaning how poor our skies have been and are getting, we are a good source of information on how bad air glow, light pollution is in our skies. So much so that within 2 weeks ago, in Science, the journal Science, a team of scientists led by Chris Kaiba, who's been doing this for quite a long time, reported that the change in sky brightness over the last decade or so has increased by an average of 7 to 10% per year worldwide. And that it's also true in the United States. And what is the data that they used to determine this? It wasn't satellite imagery. It was ground-based citizen science measurements from the program called Globe at Night. You can see the number here, 51,000 citizen scientist observations of naked eye star brightness taken by people like you and me who just go outside and say, looks like a magnitude 5 sky tonight. But instead of just saying that to ourselves, we report that to the Globe at Night database. And so I I think there's more about globe at night at the end, so I hope I'll get back to that. These LEDs that have just changed our night they're a terrific source of energy, of light. There's no question. They're efficient, they're inexpensive, they last a long time. Unlike a lot of other lighting sources, they can be turned on and off as many times as you want. They can be dimmed. You can bend, fold, and staple them. But they also generally have a lot more blue light in them. And throughout this, the blue light, the blue wavelengths are the real bad guys because it's the blue light that spoils our nighttime sensitivity, that disrupts nocturnal habitats, that creates the most sky glow. In every way, blue light is the worst thing in the nighttime sky. So if you've not encountered this, let me introduce you to something called correlated color temperature, or CCT. It is a proxy that lighting people use for how much blue light is in a fixture. And it comes from the black body curves of stars. And you don't need to know that. All you need to know is the higher the number in K, which is kelvins, the bluer the light. And you can see this peak here. This is a 6,000, this is sunlight basically, peaking here and visible. And as you get down to lower color temperatures, the peak is redder and redder. And so that's where the trend in lighting has been going. This is a more graphic way of showing it. The lower the color temperature, the less blue light. That's as simple as I can make it for you. And the less blue light, the better it is for our stars, our environment, and so forth. Interestingly, as I pointed out, it doesn't take, since our eyes are so sensitive to blue light at night, it doesn't take much blue light to make a scene look very, very vividly illuminated. And this is one of the things that a lot of towns and cities have screwed up in their conversion to street lights. LEDs are very efficient. And so practically nobody is putting in LEDs that use as much electricity as the old ones, because the whole point of doing that is that installation is to save money. Where they get into trouble is putting in LED street lights that put out the same number of lumens, the measurement of light intensity or light output, as what had been there before. But because the light is intrinsically bluer than what it's replacing, our eyes are way more sensitive even at the same amount of light. So what I want you to do when you make your demonstrations, it doesn't come across well on video, but I'll just describe it to you. Go down to a hardware store and buy yourself a power strip. Then buy those little adapters that plug in and have a socket for a light bulb. And buy 2 identical LED bulbs, low wattage, maybe 7 watts, one with a high color temperature, maybe 4,000 Kelvin, and one with a low color temperature, maybe 2,700. Those are 2 numbers that are commonly available. Take them to your council meetings, bring along an extension cord, plug them in, and turn them on. And the difference in the color between the bulbs is very evident. But the other thing that you'll see is that the bluer one, the higher color temperature one, looks to the eye much more intense, even though it's putting out the same number of lumens. And that's a vivid demonstration for any town that's thinking about replacing lighting of any kind, is to not replace lumen for lumen. You basically need about half as many lumens to get the same perceived brightness to the eye at night. And so this notion of color temperature is becoming pretty widespread. Even if you go down to name your hardware store, Walmart, Lowe's, whatever it might be, and buy a light bulb, it will tell you on the package what the color temperature is. Sometimes a really fancy package will print it in color like this one did. But you for your home, both inside and out, and for your businesses, for your town, whatever, you want to have the lowest color temperature you can get away with. 3,000, for the IDA's point of view, 3,000 is now roughly the highest color temperature that's really acceptable. And again, it gets back to this notion of what our eyes are sensitive to. The cones are so sensitive to blue light at night. And so here's a couple of spectral comparisons. This is an old style high pressure sodium spectrum. This is the peachy colored bulb that was replaced by and large by LEDs. And you can see that most of the light output is in the red, orange, and yellow wavelengths of the spectrum. And here, for comparison, are two LEDs, one at 5,000 Kelvin, which is awful, and one at 3,000. You can see this huge blue spike. This is a sort of innate spike in LEDs. This is where LEDs naturally put out a lot of their color, a lot of their light. And the way we get to these lower color temperatures is if you're familiar with fluorescent light bulbs, there's a coating on the inside of the bulb that absorbs the light that's emitted by the bulb itself and then re-radiates it at a warmer color, or warm white, or whatever it might be. And LEDs do the same thing. They take the energy from this blue spike, they give it to a phosphor, and that phosphor re-radiates it at a lower color temperature. So that's great. And the reason is, I want you to pay close attention now to this big blue spike here, okay? That big blue spike is here shown in this heavy black line, right? The dashed line here is the sensitivity of that little sensor in your eye that controls your circadian rhythm. And so literally LEDs are assaulting your circadian rhythm in the worst way possible. This thin black line here is your daytime sensitivity. That's not the issue because LEDs aren't on during the daytime. LEDs could not be worse for our nighttime environment because of the blue light they put out. So I'm going to skip this. And so we're now seeing widespread installation of LEDs all over. This is a installation in Cambridge, Massachusetts, near me. I would hate to be the people who live in this house across the street with the light shining directly into the window like that. And so the AMA has again weighed in on this more recently, talking about how 3,000 K and lower are encouraged for outdoor installations because they do the least damage to the night. 3,000 K is no longer the best number even. There's here in Massachusetts, there's a little town called Pepperell, and one of our main IDA core team here managed to get his town, he lives in this town, and he managed to, they were going to convert their street lights to LEDs. He managed to get them to install test fixtures so that the people of the town could judge what they liked the best. Okay, these are two pictures that I took during that transition process. One of these lights is a high pressure sodium bulb, the one that was being replaced, and one of them is an LED with a color temperature of just 2,200 Kelvin. Can you figure out which one is which? The LED is on the left. It creates less glare, it's lower cost. It was the one favored by the citizens, and it provides, if you look on the street, it's a more uniform coverage. And this is the one that the townspeople preferred, and this is what was installed. It's one of the few places I know of anywhere that have installed these 2,200 Kelvin LEDs, and the townspeople just love it. And these are becoming more and more available for installation in situations like this. So don't settle. If you've got someone who's installing 4,000 Kelvin lighting, they are just so out of step with best practice. It's just no one does it anymore, really, widespread, unless they're just uninformed. And so this notion of, I'm kind of getting near the end here, the notion of light pollution, when I got into this game 20 years ago, I was kind of a fringe guy. You know, I was one of those tree-hugging astronomers who just wanted to keep my skies dark so I could use my telescope. But it's way more mainstream than that now. And you can see some of the recent articles that have appeared. Our sort of high watermark was a cover story in National Geographic more than a decade ago at this point. And that, by the way, is downtown Chicago, a place I would not want to live. So if you're looking for something to show to other people quickly, shorter than this talk, to give them a taste of what this is all about, go to the darksky.org website, or just go on YouTube and do a search on Losing the Dark. It's about a 10-minute public service video. It's a little dated down because it doesn't talk about light LEDs all that much, but it's still very good in terms of laying out what the problems are. Now, an interesting thing happened within the last 5 years or so. The lighting industry had been very opposed to what the IDA was proposing in terms of, using less light, turning off lights when you don't need them, using low color temperatures. And then about 3 years ago, the Illuminating Engineering Society, the IES, came forward and partnered with the IDA to create these 5 principles of lighting fundamentals. That light should have a clear purpose, otherwise you don't need it. Direct it only where you need it, make it no brighter than necessary, turn it on only when you need it on, and use the warmest color temperature possible. And this is sort of a graphic that shows what we're talking about here, to reduce the amount of light in our nighttime environment. As you go forward, it's really important to make it clear that those of us who love dark skies are not asking for no lights. Although there are certainly situations where no lights are warranted, we need lighting for safety and security. We're just a 24/7 society now, and there are a lot of places where we need light. But like the old Clint Eastwood movie, there are good, bad, and ugly lights, and the name of the game is to try to get the best lighting installed at the time. Because once you install a light, it's very hard to get it changed. The best way to attack this problem is to know when, like a developer is putting in a housing development, or your city is about to replace all the LED lights, all the lights in its on the streets, or maybe in its parking lots, whatever it might be, and to try to effect change at that point, because it's much easier to do at that point than later on once they're installed. I was mentioning Globe at Night before, which was the basis for that science article, and I want you to all bang the drum, please, for me, for everyone, for this amazingly wonderful program. Globe at Night was developed for 5th graders. The idea was to get them a little bit connected with the night. I'm sure you're all aware that during the pandemic, lots of people had to stay home with their kids, maybe this involves you or your grandkids or whatever. And they, in an attempt to try to keep everybody happy and occupied, a lot of them got involved in stargazing again, or for the first time. And so we have probably a new generation of amateur astronomers who have just been created within the last couple of years. And these are people who would have, bought a beginning telescope, for example, at a time, Christmas in 2020, you couldn't find a beginner's telescope for love or money, because they were all being gobbled up, and the supply chain out of China was really making them very hard to come by. But you don't need a telescope to do Globe at Night. All you have to do is go outside on a moonless night, give your eyes a little bit of time to dark adapt, and pick a target area in the sky. And the Globe at Night website tells you different times of year. Right now, for example, it's Orion. Everybody can find Orion. And so you look at Orion and you figure out how many stars you can see in and of Orion around it, and you match it to these magnitude charts like you see here. And once you've done that, then you take that information and you go online to the Globe at Night website. You enter your location, the time, your circumstances, if any, and what the magnitude was, and you click. And it takes like 15 minutes to do. This is an example of the web page where you make all these entries. You put in your time and location. If you're using a smartphone or a GPS-aided computer, it already knows where you are, and you just need to confirm that. And then you have a choice of how dark or bright your skies are down there. Some of us have a gizmo called a sky quality meter, which is shown there on the right, and this makes it even easier. You can just literally point it up at the sky and get a measurement of how bright or dark the sky is in a numerical way that can be converted to a naked eye limiting magnitude. But let me issue a caution for you. It turns out that I have one of these. I take it with me wherever I go. I make a measurement. I log on. I make make an entry. I've done this all over the world, in South America and not the Galapagos, but in the Falkland Islands. Anywhere I go, I take my sky quality meter with me. I can literally take a measurement as I'm driving along a dark road. I just hang it out the window, click it, and I get a measurement in the dark sky location. The interesting irony is that Science Mart article I was telling you about, they extracted and removed all of the sky quality meter measurements, because as it stands right now, there's no way to know whether somebody who made that measurement also did an eyeball, assessment of the sky, or whether it was just the number and that's it. So the sky quality meter is great. Here is what the outcome looks like. This is from 2021. These are points from across the United States. The darker the dot, the darker the sky. And then I just took, for your edification, I did an extract. You can see you can do this too, by the way. If you note that URL at lower right, if you go there, you can pick a location, pick a radius around that location, pick the year that you want the data for, and it spits out a map for you. And that's what this is. This is your neck of the woods. Last year, the number of people who made globe at night measurements. This is exactly the data that was used by the team that did the science article, these globe at night measurements. And so you can see that there are a couple of Birmingham, Alabama Michelle, I don't know what you're doing there, but you've got a lot of people making observations in your neck of the woods. Atlanta, not so much. I don't blame them. There's not a lot to see. But, it's good to do it even in the downtown cities. And the value here is to make these measurements, not only to make them in the first place, but to do them on a repeated basis, every 6 months, every year, change of seasons, because that builds up the database. And so I want to encourage you and everyone your families, your neighbors, whatever, to make these globe at night measurements. As I've just described, they have become very valuable in the fight against light pollution. And if nothing else, it gets your neighbor to look up at the sky for the first time in maybe his or her, the last 20 years, and just do a little assessment of what's going on there. Okay, well, that's it. Pretty much the task here is for all of us is to light only when you need it, where you need it, and just where necessary, because everything else is waste. Here's how a couple of the websites that you need to get to with a lot more of this information. There's my contact information. I welcome you to contact me. I am happy to speak to any other groups or to answer questions that you individually might have. I have been at this a long time. I've retired from Sky and Telescope, but this is still my passion. And I want us all to try to fight the good fight. And as I was saying before, let me just close with a little personal anecdote. Tom, maybe you can chime in too. One person can make a difference. In my little town, population 30,000, maybe not so little a town, we had a little strip mall in the middle of our town that was being redeveloped. And the developer was putting in some nice places, and I noticed in the planning docs that he was going to change out the lighting and put in LED lights. So I looked up what he was planning to install, and I got in touch with him, and I said, hey, you're putting in 4,000 Kelvin lighting. This same manufacturer makes a 3,000 Kelvin version. Would you please consider putting that in instead? He said, sure, I'll check into it. He passed the information on to his architect. Time goes by, the lighting gets installed, and it's gorgeous. I don't know what he did, but he picked beautiful, low glare LED fixtures that were warm and not too intense. And I got back in touch with him, and I said, this is just amazing. Thank you very much. He said, no, I need to thank you, Kelly, because I went to the manufacturer. They had 3,000. I wanted 2,700. They made a special batch for me. We liked the look of the lighting in our property, on that property, so much that we're retrofitting all of our other properties with those lights. And so that one touch of one person has made, in my town anyway, a huge difference. And I think you'll find that it can be true for yours as well. So with that, Michelle, I think I'm going to stop. And I don't know what we've got in the chat here. But I would certainly welcome any questions you have. And I know you're kind of using this as a launch pad for your own efforts down there. I want to thank those of you who came tonight, and let's have some questions if you've got them.
Yeah, feel free to unmute yourself, or if you're not comfortable speaking, you can type your question in the chat and I will read it out. I've just posted some resources in the chat for folks based on the things that you were saying. So there's no questions there.
Great.
I see that Sarah Johnson has a question. Go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Kelly. Not actually a question. I just want to say this was a great talk. I had a preview of one that you've already done before, but currently I'm driving. I've been driving for like 13 hours from Pennsylvania, and I'm almost home to Alabama, Huntsville. And I just driving across the landscape can't exaggerate how important this feels right now, because I have just been extremely overwhelmed on this drive of how just the lighting just seems more and more absurd than I ever remember. And so, yeah, I feel like what you're doing is so important. So thank you so much for doing this, this talk.
All right, Sarah, thank you. Get back to driving and get home safe, okay?
Thank you. Dan, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to say, don't forget your indoor lighting. So your eyes are exposed to all this stuff, you know, in your living room all night, and swapping out those LEDs without paying close attention to the color temperature can be a problem. And in particular, there's a technology called phosphor converted amber. You can get these bulbs like they're kind of pricey, 2 for $20 on Amazon, and they're wonderful. They have a phosphor inside that converts that blue spike to the yellow, and they look like a warm incandescent bulb, but they're an LED.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. And it's great to see you again. I know, you know, we've connected over the years, many years, and it's great to see you're still in the game here.
Yeah, thanks.
So I just want to say that we've had some interest in our astronomy club with the Globe at Night. So I'm going to bring that up next week at our meeting and see if we can't fill in some of those blank spots south of Atlanta. Yeah, Atlanta's terrible. We're pretty far south of Atlanta, so we got some pretty decent skies. You know, we've got some members who can certainly help fill in some of the blank spots there. So I appreciate you bringing that up again, and we're going to see what we can do.
Yeah, and for those of you who are involved with astronomy clubs, here's a point I want to make. The IDA has roughly 3,000 members. These are people who pay $35 a year to support the cause. There are, I'm going to use rough numbers here, but there's roughly 300,000 amateur astronomers in the United States and Canada. That means that only 1 in every 100 amateur astronomers, those of us who arguably have the most to gain or lose from the success of the IDA or failure, are members of the IDA, are stepping forward and doing our part. I think it is shameful, and I tell every club that I give this talk to, it is shameful that more amateur astronomers don't support the IDA by being dues-paying members. And the reason is the IDA has those of us who have been in this game, we realize that IDA is has that sort of outsized reputation for being the guardian of the night. We are at the table with the IES and with state legislatures and so forth. They have only 9 employees. There are so many places that we should be fighting the good fight that we just can't because there aren't enough of us. And there would be more of us if they had the money to hire more people to be in the thing, to hit the brush fires that come up all across the country. And so I encourage you individually, I won't embarrass you by a show of hands, but you individually and all of your clubs, astronomy clubs that you're involved with, to urge them to individually become members of the IDA. It's roughly the same amount of money as a club dues for an amateur astronomy club. And so I think it's the best money spent, at least in terms of trying to preserve what we've got.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Timothy.
Oh yeah. Instead of the I guess the low temperature LEDs, if you already have like the high temperature ones, the 4K ones, what about using a red filter of some sort?
Okay, what's the situation that you're talking about?
Like if you already have LED, you already have the 4K or 5K LED bulbs, and rather than getting whole new bulbs for your house, you just get a red filter.
Yeah, that will certainly work. I mean, it might make your neighbors kind of scratch their heads as to why you're now suddenly a red light district. But you know, if it's just a screw-in LED bulb, that's this, you know, maybe it's something that you can get at. Here's what happened. When LEDs, commercial, you know, residential business LEDs were introduced roughly 15 years ago, everyone was fixated on how energy efficient they were. And the most energy efficient LEDs at that time were the ones with the highest color temperature because of that inherent blue spike. So there were a lot of installations of 5,000, even 6,000 Kelvin LEDs. They're awful. They're ugly. It's like being in a war zone. And so what's happened over time is that the cost and the efficiency of the warmer color temperature LEDs it's basically on par with the other kind, the higher color temperature. And so it's not that big a deal in most cases to simply replace the LED that you've got with something that's a warmer color temperature. The cost has come down, except in, you know, unusual cases like Dan was talking about, where you're getting the amber, the phosphor coated amber. But that's not, and although that's ideal, you know, even just changing out a 4,000K for a 2,700K and maybe lowering the wattage and the lumen output will make a huge difference, and that might be the least expensive way to go. And you don't have to worry about, you know, the weathering effects of that red filter.
Tom English, go ahead.
So there have been some cases in the past where I was arguing for lower CCT LEDs, and I got some pushback from people who would quote color rendition data, especially in law enforcement. And that ends up being a difficult argument to counter unless I have some real data to show that it's not really that big a deal.
Right.
Do you have any arguments or data to support that pushback?
Okay, great point, Tom. So there is a value called color rendering index, or CRI. And it basically is how well can you tell the color of your surroundings based on the illumination by this bulb. And and it is true that the lower the color temperature, often the color rendering index takes a hit, but not always. You need to shop around. And what I would do in defense of these low color temperature LEDs is say, you know, you weren't complaining when all we had was high pressure sodium, which basically has 0 color rendering index. And so now you're getting better color rendition, regardless of what LED you use. So it's improvement. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. There are so many reasons. It's true that color rendering is better with the more blue light you have. It just sort of stands to reason that if you illuminate something with a full spectrum, you're going to be able to tell colors better. But there are so many reasons not to inject more blue light into the environment for all the reasons I mentioned. There is the nuclear option, which is you realize that if you install these bright blue LEDs, that you're going to increase the likelihood of cancer among your citizens. You know, that's one thing you can push back on them with, that there is data that shows that blue light at night disrupts circadian rhythm in humans, and that leads to bad things in humans. I wouldn't, you don't want to press that too hard. That is to say, there's a difference between a little bit of street light flooding in your window and someone who's staring at a 50-inch LED TV screen until 3 a.m.
Yeah.
Or checking email or a text or something with a handheld like right in front of their face. So, and we don't know yet, the people who do the research on this, we don't know what the threshold is for actually creating the kind of long-term circadian disruption from LEDs or these blue screens. But I will say this, we as humans, before there was artificial light, if you think about it, we evolved as a species that would be exposed to bright, full spectrum sunlight for a large fraction of the daylight hours. And at night, we steeped ourselves in very dark surroundings. Maybe there was a moon out, maybe not, but it was going to be dark. The fire would die away and it would be dark all night long. And that created a very distinct high and low for our circadian rhythm. And now if you think about it, during now in modern society, our circadian rhythm is assaulted at both ends. During the daytime, we hardly ever go outside. We're in this kind of, medium gray environment all day long. And then we extend night into the wee hours with lighting all the time. And so we don't know yet what the long-term environmental and human physiological outcomes are for that kind of skewing of the day-night cycle. But it can't possibly be good. So I would say that, yes, you might not be able to tell a red car from a green car quite as well, but the other factors are I would say trump that one concern.
I have a question about the process by which communities can have a lighting test done in their community, done on a street, like the one that you shared about in
Right.
Massachusetts. That just seems like a lot of work to have somebody install test colored lights.
No, it does seem that way. So the first part, Michelle, is you individually and collectively need to be vigilant to know when such a transition, a change out to LEDs is going to take place, so that you can inject yourself into the process before the purchase is actually made. There are so many LED manufacturers now that they are eager to show their stuff. And so what happens in these test cases is that the city or town would contact 3 or 4 different manufacturers and say, we're interested in your product, but we want to see it first. Can you install a half dozen of your streetlights at your cost in our town? And they'll say, yeah. How soon can we get them up? So they tend to be zero cost for the town. And it gives the officials cover, because if they're basing their decisions on what the citizenry actually says it wants in terms of preferred lighting, then that gives them a reason to feel confident that what they're installing is good. I'll give you another anecdote. This is now like maybe 8 or 9 years old, but it bears. I found out that a local town was going to be converting its streetlights to LEDs. I got in touch with, again, this is a one-on-one contact that paid a dividend. It doesn't always, but often it does. I got in touch with the city engineer who was in charge of the project, and I said, did you think about putting in a set of test fixtures so that people could see what they're going to get? And she said, no, that's a really good idea. So she put in a whole bunch of fixtures that were, 4,000 Kelvin. And I said, well, wait. Did you ask the manufacturers to put in some that were 3,000 Kelvin? She'd already done the survey. And she said, no, we didn't. Let's do it again. I couldn't believe it. So she did the test again, this time with a mix of 4 and 3,000. And guess what? The people preferred the lower color temperature. They preferred the warmer light. And so that's what they went with. And so, if you can convince, if somebody is in a decision-making capacity is uncertain that this is a good thing to do, I can connect them to people who've done it, to city officials who have done it and would swear by the process. Maybe not in the South. I don't know how, if people in the South trust anybody north of the Mason-Dixon line or not, but that's where my experience base is.
Thanks for
It
the
would be
demo.
good to have that information, which cities have done that.
Oh, gosh, and it's just my limited experience. It might be useful to contact the IDA. Maybe they have something a little bit more comprehensive. I can give you a couple of anecdotes that support this and that you can cite because you'll have this recorded. The city of Davis, California, which is a college town, installed and didn't bother with a test and installed 4,000 Kelvin lights that the citizens hated so much that they demanded that the town change them out after they were installed at great cost. And the town did it, right? They changed it to the lower color temperature. In Phoenix, which has something like, round numbers, 200,000 streetlights, they were in the process of making a retrofit using 4,000 Kelvin fixtures. And the IDA chapter in Phoenix got to the city council, made a presentation, and the councilors voted unanimously 9-0, not only to replace the remaining streetlights with 3,000 Kelvin instead of 4, but they also voted to replace the ones that had already been installed. And so, in so many cases, we see people make these decisions. The decision makers in cities and towns make these decisions on outdoor lighting, and they screw it up not because they were intentionally negligent. They just didn't know. And this is where you all come in. Just the knowledge, the education is a large part of getting the right outcome.
This is Martha Leak in Valdosta, Georgia. And Kelly, I've met you before at AAS meetings, but
Yes.
I just wanted to say tomorrow I'm giving a program on how to see the comet through the light pollution of the moon.
Yes.
I hope to bring up light pollution in general and put out literature on the table. And I think going through our students in this area and through the clubs and going to the park at Stephen Foster State Park and other parks in the area, it might be possible to get more dots on that map that indicate that we have participated in Globe of Night and some of the other positive features of the light pollution problem.
Yeah, thank you for that. And in fact, this comet has been a real good example to throw out to people for why light pollution is bad. And of course, it's the narrow case of affecting astronomers' ability to see the night sky, but you can with absolute truth say more people would be able to find this comet in binoculars or however they're looking if there was less light pollution, in this case moonlight, but less light pollution in the sky.
Right.
And so you're absolutely right that will be very, very useful to bring that up. Good luck finding the comet. I've had pretty good luck, but it's nothing much to see. I have to say,
Yeah,
it's a little puffy snot ball up in the sky, and it is definitely not green.
I thought it was blue the other night when I looked at it, but last night I looked and looked and looked, and even though our skies were sort of clear, no luck. So
last night I had the same experience. It took me 15 minutes to find it, and then it was only barely.
Right. Yeah, thank you.
All right.
I just had a quick question. The company that makes the lights for the stadiums that you showed the example of?
Yes,
What's the name of it?
MUSCO, Musco. Musco Lighting, and in fact, the Musco been a terrific partner. Its lighting systems are not inexpensive, but when they're installed, they're a thing of beauty. And Musco is a nationwide company. There's probably a representative near you, wherever you might be living. They sort of have regional reps. And what I'd encourage you to do is ask them for directions to finding one of their installations with the super well corrected lighting. Because when you see it, you'll come to believe that it really can be done.
There's, the reason why I ask is because there's at least one of our sports fields that is getting renovated and probably with lights changed. And there's talk about a football stadium.
Yeah.
And it would be nice to get this embedded early. So that if they're building a $54 million, or whatever, tens of millions of dollar football stadium,
Yeah.
adding an extra $100,000 for good lighting is in the noise, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I don't know if you can hear me.
Go ahead,
Uh,
yes. Go
Mike
ahead.
Lewis here. I'm in East Alabama, but I came down 10 years ago through Northern Virginia. I was a member and still am of NOVAC.
Oh, yes.
And I was Bob Gent's next door neighbor for several years. You may remember the late Bob Gent, president
Yes.
of IDA. I briefly lobbied with IDA in 2009 Congress during the Obama administration's ingress into the White House to work with the Energy Department to change the lighting standards, as you indicated, going to LED. I just wanted to make the point that you're right. I mean, there were good intentions at that time, a misunderstanding about the color of LED. I know our argument, I worked with Bob Parks, who was also a member of NOVAC and headed the DC office at IDA. Our argument was that these LED systems would be ideal for rural interstates, rural roadways, where they could be set to go off altogether late
Right.
nights. I don't know if that ever happened. I haven't heard if, that's obviously ideal if you don't have light at all. And I guess there are motion sensors in place that would gradually relight these lights as cars are approaching from a distance and turn
Sure.
them slowly off as cars move away. But
Right.
that was our intent at that time. But no one foresaw that the overall brightness in the extreme blue spectrum was going to be an issue. So
Right. Thanks for that, and thanks for your hard work. You raised an issue that I meant to mention but didn't. So suppose your town has installed streetlights already, LED streetlights, and they're not great. The little bitty on top, the hockey puck that is the day-night sensor, can be replaced at some cost with a smart control. It essentially makes every street light, gives it an addressable IP address. And so it can be controlled by a central computer. And so it can be, for example, all the lights in a town can be programmed to dim to 50% after 11 p.m. or go off completely in certain circumstances. Or if Mrs. Smith down at the end of Apple Street can't stand the LED outside her window, that individual LED can just, with a few clicks from the Department of Public Works, can be dimmed. So that's a powerful way. Even if your town already has committed to a bad lighting system, if they have that what's called a 7-pin connector on top for the day-night sensor, they can be retrofit with electronics that can control the LED and dim it to more reasonable levels.
Kelly, if just give you a little update on Charleston here, that is one of the things, everything that I requested that I got from you, they pretty much give me, especially the smart control, because they said they are going to implement that, but they're still wanting to stick with the 4,000 Kelvin. I'm still working on that.
Okay. Ask them, Tom, this is citywide?
Citywide, about 7,000 streetlights.
See if you can get them to commit to a test section and let the townspeople, voice their preference.
I think I'm going to have to meet with the head man that's working on that, because I've tried that with one of the guys I'm working through. Kind of blew me off. He said it's not a blue light, it's a bright light. I said, well, it's got the blue wave into it. He didn't understand what I meant. So
See, again, that's the problem. A lot of the people who are in the decision making, they just don't understand. They just don't. And I apologize that you're not getting through any better than you have. I'm sorry.
Well, no, I'm still working on it. I've had some good articles in the city paper here just recently about the dark sky down here, and I gave them the opportunity to talk to Dominion about it because they're the ones pushing the 4,000. Talk to my council member and a couple other advocates and the Low Country Stargazers and Grand Strand. So I think we're getting more. It's like taking baby steps.
Sure. Tom, here's one thing I would suggest that you try. In Charleston, wherever it might be, find a modern development, commercial development, residential development that you know has installed 3,000 Kelvin lighting, and then point that out to the officials and say, if you don't believe me, go take a look. Here's what 3,000 Kelvin looks like. It's really nice.
And also, you brought up a good thing about I'm with 2 clubs and try to get the members out there to back you. They say it in words, but in actions,
Yeah,
it's kind of hard.
yeah. Well, one way to do that is to make IDA membership a sort of add-on to their annual dues paying activity. You know, is check this box and become an IDA member.
I'm curious why your municipality is so fixed on the 4,000 as opposed to the 3,000. Is there a cost factor, or why are they so married to it?
Because I think it's just because Dominion Energy, that's the ones they're pushing. And it's like when I spoke with their guy, they say they got studies that show that it's better for safety was. And I presented the studies that we have, the science study that just came out. I presented them with my information and they all give the smiles. And fortunately, I still have my council member behind me and he's working with me on it. So he still have hopes that we can get it addressed.
Yeah, so Tom, I just want to jump in here and not get too down in the weeds. There is one study out there that is a flawed study that came to the conclusion that the public, the participants' perception of how well lit the road was better with 4,000 K than 3,000 K. I know what that study is, and if that's the one that they're backing, ask them if I can put you in touch with the scientist. Nancy Clanton is the primary author on that, and she will set them straight. They're cherry picking the results on that study.
Okay, you got my email, Kelly, if you could send me information on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Or if you can, in turn, Tom, send me the information that this guy is citing.
Okay, hopefully I can get back with him on that.
We'll swap.
Okay, thank you, Kelly, appreciate it. And thank you for a good presentation again.
A pleasure, Tom. Thank you.
Go ahead, Tom.
So Tom brought out the fact that Dominion's pushing 4,000. We have the same issue in North Carolina with Duke Energy. This seems to be maybe nationwide that these utilities are really strongly presenting that as what you should get. Is that because they have lots of them to sell, or do they have a specific reason?
That's primarily that's what they've got in inventory. They made a big buy of 4,000 K and they want to install them. And I've heard this both from about Dominion and Duke. I can tell you that there are utilities up here in the Northeast that are installing 3,000 Kelvin as their default. It's not nationwide. It's not like they're in some giant conspiracy. I think you've hit it exactly, Tom. Ask them why they are pushing 4,000 K and ask them specifically is that because that's what you've got in inventory?
It's a good, like that.
You know, up here in the Northeast, a lot of towns, what they end up doing is they buy the street lights are typically owned by the utility, and often if it's an old system, they'll have been depreciated to nothing, and the towns will actually buy the street lights from the utility company, and at that point, the town has the flexibility to put anything up they want.
I had I had another sort of comment because this happened up in Canada. The LEDs don't produce any heat, right? So
Not very
what
much.
happened up in Canada is that it became winter. Now the old lights would generate enough heat that they would stay warm, so that if it got cold and snowed, the snow wouldn't cover the fixture. Right? Now with the LEDs, if it snows, the snow just covers the fixture and
Right.
nothing happens. So
Right.
there was a municipality up in Canada that had to add little heaters to the LED lights to stop them from snowing over.
No, if you end up with a lot of snow there in the south, you've got bigger problems than your LED
Right.
lights, I gotta
I'm
say.
curious, like up in the Northeast, this happens, right?
No, we don't have any problems with that. In fact, if you look at a high power LED, like for a street light, it often has an integrated radiator to get rid of whatever little heat is generated, because the performance of the LED engine, which is what it's called, really goes out the window if it overheats. So they have to shunt that heat away in some way. And I'm actually, there are places in Canada that get super cold, and even in the United States, and those are kind of outliers. We don't have that problem in Massachusetts. I've not heard of anyone having to struggling with LEDs that were underperforming in cold weather.
Well, I was more thinking of the snow actually and ice physically
Oh, I see.
covering the fixture. Like,
Well, the thing about LED, if an LED streetlight is installed properly, it's facing down, right? So,
Right.
so what is going to get covered, if anything, is the radiator, which is on top, or maybe the day-night sensor. I could see that as being a problem.
You're not familiar with winter in Canada.
Well, apparently not.
You get icicles and you get snow that will hang down. And anyway, this city actually had a problem, and they had to install a little heater on the light fixtures.
That's crazy.
Wow.
Wow.
Because they were literally getting just covered in ice.
Yeah.
And now you have a light coming through a block of ice.
Right.
And it didn't work very well.
Well, that's because they're using that Canadian electricity, which our US electricity is better.
Yeah. Okay. Them's fighting words.
Yeah.
Actually, the blackout that in 2003, I was working at David Dunlap Observatory
Yes.
at the time. And the neat thing about that is that Toronto went out. There were aurora borealis in the sky that night. And
Oh,
so,
wow.
yeah.
That's great.
So that was fantastic. I enjoyed the blackout. Nobody else did. So anyway, I just thought it was hilarious that the thing's covered in snow and ice, and they had to install a little heater. I thought it was pretty funny.
That is fun. I'm going to call this meeting to a close. I think we've asked a lot of Kelly to meet with us for this long. Thank you, Kelly, for your extended time with us. And
Oh, it's a great pleasure, and I'm happy to do that. In retirement, this is my main cause is fighting the good fight. So thank you for coming and for inviting me, and please keep me posted on how things go down there.
we will.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Well
your great
done.
presentation.
Excellent presentation.
Yes.
Okay, thanks so much, all. I'm gonna go have dinner now.
Me too. All right. Bye.
All right, have a good night.
You too.
Good night.
Bye.